Hey guys, so for today's mini lesson, we're going to do a little bit of a guitar tutorial with two very basic chords. The principle that I decided to associate with this lesson is Thorndike and Skinner's operant conditioning because a lot of the values of it really apply to music learning. You know, one of the biggest ones is repetition leads to reinforcement. So in music, everything is about repetition and everything is goal based and everything is about reward, you know. You start by being able to make a sound by pressing your finger on the fretboard. Then you start by making a sequence of sounds, which creates a chord. Then you learn multiple chords, which creates ability to play chord progressions, which leads to songs, which leads to melody. So everything is goal based. So operating conditioning kind of felt like the right thing to do. So I believe that it's ratio based because reinforcement occurs after however long it takes to get a consistent sound. One chord is repeated throughout the same song and many others after that. There's a lot of natural negative reinforcement that I will be incorporating into this lesson because, you know, the more you practice, the less your fingers hurt. You take away the pain of playing for newer beginner players. Calluses begin to form. There's also a lot of other natural reinforcements, such as over time, the sound grows nicer. You have a larger library of chords. And I liken it to video games because in video games, a lot of times everything is goal oriented. You know, the longer you play, the higher you get in worlds. Your weapon library grows, your items grow. There's all kinds of cool new achievements, and such is the same when you unlock new achievements in music. We can kind of apply the Premack principle because a lot of times students will say, can we just play the song? And unfortunately, you have to kind of tell them, you can play the song once you're fluent at learning the chords, the components of the song. So we have to start with that, and then you can play the song because it's all about practice versus pleasure, right? You want to practice so you can get to the pleasure part. So essentially, I called it kind of more of a partial reinforcement style and a fixed ratio schedule, i.e., you would take a short break perhaps after practicing a song. You got to repeat it a few times, notice a bit of improvement, and then take a break and a breather, step back, and then go back into it. So it's definitely partial reinforcement, fixed ratio schedule. So that is how I'm incorporating Thorndike and Skinner's operant conditioning, and I hope you enjoy the lesson. So for today's lesson, I chose two chords, C and F. They have very similar finger shapes, which is like a patternistic approach, and they can be applied to thousands of popular songs, okay? These are like a gateway. Amazing. So you're going to be using your first three fingers only for these chords. So the first one is C. It sounds and looks like this. And then the next one is F, and it looks like this. And you can play the last string open if you want, for our purposes today anyway. So it basically is a pretty easy formation, okay? So you put your first finger on the first fret, second string. That's a C. It's the namesake of the chord. And then on the fourth string, second fret, you're going to put your second finger, okay? And then you're going to take your third finger, put it on the second string, third fret. So the notes you're creating are C, E, and a C octave, but you can strum it open from the second string. So if you look at the second string, you can just strum right down with it. Now it's your turn to try it, and it's going to definitely take some time. So if you'd like to pause the video, you can take some time and try to get a good sound out of it. So what I would like you to do is, you know, try to get your fingers in there. Sometimes you'll have varying success with it. It may come off great the first try, have a nice clean open sound. Other times it might sound a little more muted. Perhaps the tones aren't coming in quite as clear. You got to really check that your fingers are all kind of they're not pressing down on the other strings. You want them to really be open, like from the side. Your fingers should be open and give lots of space, because if you press flat, you're going to be muting essential tones. So that's the C chord, okay? That's the first one in our lesson today. And the second chord is F, okay? So it's very similar. Now, what I want you to do is take your second and third finger and just move both of them down one string, respectively. So the first one on the second string, C, which is your third finger, just move it down one string, okay? And then your second finger, move that one down one string as well. So first finger stays in the exact same place. That one's a constant. You don't even need to move that one. So now you move those two fingers down. So check it out. Remember I said the first finger doesn't move. And here's what it looks like a little more close up. Very nice. So now let's take a step back and just move into the direction of a repetition and reinforcement, okay? So positive reinforcement of going back and checking individual notes is that the cleaner you get the individual notes, the nicer the chord is going to sound. And the more you practice placing your fingers, the easier it's going to be to switch back and forth, which is where you want to get after you've done the repetition and the practicing. You know, you want to be able to just and not have to worry about thinking about your hands are just going to know what to do. You know, it's about building that muscle memory, and to do that, you know, you need that repetition factor. So what I always recommend doing is just repeating those notes to make sure you can get the clear tone, you know. So just even do something like this. Go upside down if you want. You can do inverted. Whatever it takes to really feel like you're exercising those individual tones to make the whole chord sound better as a whole, you know? And then, of course, you're going to want to try it again for the F chord. Make sure those notes are coming in through nice. So then another element of this positive reinforcement is that we're going to start adding a better sound and easier transitions between the chords. So what you would do after that, I think, is a nice step forward, would be to play the chords in a quarter note fashion, just nice and slow. So just watch this. This would be an element of positive reinforcement because you're combining the notes together that you were just working on to create more of a musical effect. You know, before it was a little more technical. It didn't quite have as much of a beautiful or a musical sensibility to it, and now you're kind of getting more into that factor of musicality, you know, because you're starting to strum chords, and strumming is a big factor. Now there may be an element of negative reinforcement here as well, because if a student was struggling and said, "Oh, I don't really feel comfortable strumming yet," I would say, okay, well, you know, if you can fluently show me that you understand where your fingers go and you can get a decent tone out of the fingers, I would be happy to wait until next week to start introducing more difficult patterns. And that might make the student feel a little more comfortable with where they're going, maybe feel like they have a little more time to focus on the first step. And maybe another great part about this type of reinforcement is that along the way, they may find that they're comfortable enough that they do it without a prompt from the teacher. So that is a really great part, and it happens a lot more than I expected to, that a lot of people expected to. And it's really great when a student shows up and says, "Hey, like that thing you wanted to introduce this week, I actually kind of started doing it," and it's very encouraging for everybody involved. Okay, so anyway, so given, if you want to do that negative reinforcement and kind of say, why don't you try getting better at that first, and then we'll move on to the harder thing next week. So unfortunately, there are sometimes scenarios in a lesson like this where there may be some positive punishment that comes into play, which will be redirected into a positive nature. But what would happen sometimes is, you know, let's say I assign you to the student says, I'd rather wait till next week to learn the harder strumming patterns. I said, that's fine, but you know, while you're at it, why don't you practice the stuff that you already are working on and try to get a lot better at it, you know? Like, you know, let's say I would like you to come back and be able to strum every note with a nice clear tone. And this is if you're, you know, if they're a very beginner student, and come back and be able to strum the chord open with a nice clear sound. And then, you know, should they come in next week and I can tell they haven't practiced at all, I might say to them, all right, so I think you're ready. Why don't we just start playing the song with that strumming pattern I talked to you about last week and then we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. And by the way, I don't think I've ever actually done this, but teachers have done it to me. So I imagine one day, maybe some form like this, but it always redirects into a positive light because the student usually comes out, because rather than, sometimes they lie and they say, oh, I practice, which everyone's guilty of. And practice in music, you know, that's such a huge thing because, you know, you can't just show up for the lecture. That's just not how it works, you know. So, I think it creates kind of a positive reinforcement in the long run because the student then realizes, oh, like that's where I'm trying to get, you know, I'm trying to get to that point. So if I'm not practicing, then what am I here for? And I'm willing to bet at least $5 that student will show up next week with that pattern down to a T, because when you get right down to it, it's not that difficult of a pattern if you put some time into it, and especially if you put consistent time into it. And once again, it goes back to that fixed ratio schedule, you know. You practice it a few times, then you step back and take a break. Even if you do it 2 repetitions of that per day, you are going to surpass the goal of what you were probably asked to do. You just have to devote that time. And once you get there, I think that's the greatest reward. And at the end of the lesson, which could take 2 or 3 lessons to get that strumming pattern down, you're going to be able to play songs with just those 2 chords. Here's a great example of it. I'll stop the world and melt with you. You've seen the difference, and it's getting better all the time. And when a teacher kind of displays that end goal, it almost like it shows you, like in Super Mario Bros. There's Peach's castle right over there in World 8. You just got to get there. It's really like, oh wow, like I can do that too. It's like, yes, you can. You just have to practice a little bit every day. You got to have that fixed ratio learning style. You have to have that partial reinforcement from the teacher to say, all right, what did you do this week? Like, oh, great job. Like, that sounds great. I can tell you practiced. There's nothing better than when a teacher says, I can tell that you practiced. And sometimes, maybe we'll have that positive punishment, but it might not be necessary because the natural positive reinforcements that come with music are so great. There's nothing greater than listening to somebody play or listening to your teacher play and saying, I want to do that, and then practicing, and your guitar is the reinforcer because it suddenly displays what you're trying to do, and it's like, oh, that's the sound I want. So if you run with that, you are destined to be a good guitar player and a good musician in general, depending on, this could be applied to any instrument. And I hope this lesson in guitar with elements of Thorndike and Skinner's opera conditioning is effective, and I hope if anybody watched this that you learned a little bit something about a couple of guitar chords, and now you can play I Melt With You by Modern English, which is a great song. And yeah, have a great day, everyone.